So please, Bill, and we'll proceed with the program. Before we do, I have a few comments I'd like to share with you, and it addresses the reason we're here tonight, and that is to commemorate the 20th anniversary of Columbia's final mission and to honor the astronauts, 7 men and women who lost their lives aboard the shuttle. We're here to celebrate their passion for their work and honor the family and friends, many of whom are with us this evening, and recognize how their lives were forever changed by the events of February the 1st, 2003. We're grateful for the legacy of these 7 astronauts. Heroes like these individuals expand our sense of possibilities. I think they cause us to raise our eyes a little higher and to strive for honor evermore. For those of you who are guests and may not be familiar with that phrase, it is from the Matador song, the Texas Tech University alma mater. It is from that line we took the name of our university magazine, Evermore. Tonight's commemoration had its genesis in the publication of the 3rd issue of that magazine. In the pages of that issue, we learn the full story of Texas Tech's connections to Columbia's final mission. We read about the childhood ambitions of Mission Commander Rick Husband, who attended Texas Tech, and his wife Evelyn, whom he met there. And Evelyn, I have to tell the story of our earlier discussion. Evelyn showed me a picture of the east side of Holden Hall. And she was to meet Rick in Holden Hall in the north entrance on that side. And if you are familiar with that building, you realize there's 2 doors on the east side. Rick was in one doorway and Evelyn was in the other. And I think they were there for quite a while, not wondering where the other person was. So she showed me that photograph tonight and she said, "Which is the north door?" I said, "That one." And she goes, "I knew I was right." Well, in that issue, we also learn about pilot Willie McCool, the son of 2 Texas Tech faculty members, Barry and Audrey McCool. We are introduced to Ken Pick, who helped the search efforts after the accident, and Colonel Paul Lockhart, Rick Husband's lifelong friend who eventually brought him home. And for the very first time, we hear the story of Regent Ginger Carrick Davis, who was in mission control that day as the capsule communicator for the International Space Station, and how she had to break the news to the ISS crew. Tonight, we're here to pay tribute to all of them for the roles they played on that day and the 2 decades since. We're also here to recognize others in the Texas Tech community who have contributed to the vision of the space industry. Red Raiders like Dr. Bernard Harris, a flight surgeon who became the first African American to walk in space. Sally Davis, a mathematics major who served as the shuttle system safety manager and a member of the mission management team for the Atlantis Orion project. Lucy Krantz, the manager of the mission support for the Orion project, that's what I meant to say, and the daughter of NASA legend Gene Krantz. Lucy, I met many years ago when I was the Dean of Arts and Sciences. And where is Lucy? There she is. And where we were earlier, she showed me the vest that her mother made for Gene Krantz that he wore on so many of those missions. Is really fabulous. Today, Red Raiders continue to contribute to the future of the space industry. We want to honor all of those who work in this industry not just those with a Texas Tech connection. If you work for NASA or in a related industry, would you please stand so we could recognize and thank you? Thank you for your service. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for your presence here tonight. And we hope that this is a meaningful evening for you. Now I'd like to introduce Glennis Young, the Director of Storytelling at Texas Tech University and the editor of Evermore magazine. Glennis, thank you for the fabulous work you've done, and please proceed with the program.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am very, very honored to have on the stage with me today Ms. Ginger Carrick-Davis, one of our Texas Tech regents, as well as a longtime NASA flight director and employee in various capacities. And we asked Ginger to sit down with us today and tell her experiences that led through the discussion in the magazine that many of you have read. If you have not seen issue 3 of Evermore, it's a long, emotional story of what happened with the Columbia mission. I encourage you to pick up a copy and read it. We have many over at the pop-up table. Ginger, to start off today, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood and how you got interested in NASA?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me today, and thank you, Texas Tech, for sponsoring this event today. It was really heartwarming to me to know that you all cared and noted this anniversary. But my journey to NASA started when I was 5 years old. I read a book called Astronomy and Astronauts. And I was in my room, I read that book cover to cover, and I remember coming out to the living room being very proud of myself because I told my mom and dad that, yea, verily, I know what I want to do with the rest of my life, and I want to be an astronaut, or maybe a professional basketball player, but probably an astronaut. So, and my dad, who had gone to Texas Tech and never finished, who was a dairy farmer, and my mother, who had completed all of 6 grades of education, I remember them looking at each other like, okay, astronaut it is. Do you know what you need to do that? And I said, no, I'm only 5. And they said, well, you're going to need to go to the university to pursue either one of these degrees, but one of these goals, but it's okay, and your dad has a great job, and we'll be able to pay for college, and they were very supportive to make sure that I had every opportunity to excel in either basketball or in STEM.
Can you tell us about your path to Texas Tech?
Oh, yes. So my path to Texas Tech, when I graduated high school, I was only 17, and my mom had kept a very tight rein on me, as my dad had passed away when I was 11. So when I graduated, I didn't feel like I was prepared to go away to college, but UT Austin had offered me a full 5-year scholarship to get a master's degree in aerospace engineering, and I thought, all right, I'm going to take that job. But I'm going to take that scholarship, but I put in the prepayment for the dorm fees and everything, and I was getting ready to go there, and about 3 days before, I felt this overwhelming feeling of this is not supposed to happen. So I talked to my mom, and by now it had been advertised in the paper because I'd graduated second in my class. I was female athlete of the year. Everybody was so proud of me that I picked this school. And I told my mom, I'm like, I don't want to disappoint you or my teachers or the city, but I'm not ready to go yet. you didn't let me do anything. Because she didn't. I wasn't allowed to date. If I wanted to go to a football game, yeah, I can go. Guess who's sitting next to me? So I thought, oh my God, I'm going to find this place called 6th Street, and I'm going to lose my mind. So she said, look, just trust your instincts, and you can stay and go to the university here, University of Texas, El Paso, and then after 2 years, you can look at transferring. So I did that, and after my first year at UTEP, I felt a little more secure in myself, and I started writing letters to the chairman of the physics department at Texas Tech, Dr. Walter Borst. And those letters turned into phone calls, and eventually he said, hey, why don't you come and take a tour of the campus? So my mom and I drove down there, and we met with Dr. Borst, and I told him, I said, hey, here's the deal. I have a 4.0. I want to work at NASA one day. I don't have any money at all. My mom makes $11,000 a year, and she can't afford to send me to college. And if there's any scholarships or part-time jobs or anything you could help me with, I would really appreciate it. And he says, why don't you and your mom go tour the campus for a couple of hours and come back and I'll see what I can do. And that man found 3 scholarships and 2 part-time jobs. And I did the math, and I'm like, oh my God, that's everything I need for my junior year. And so I would not have been able to go to Texas Tech had it not been for him believing in me and really taking a chance on me. He wound up, I've kept in touch with him all these years, and I got married in 2021, and I invited Dr. Borst to the wedding. And then I surprised him because he was one of the people that I chose to have a father-daughter dance with. But those are the types of people we have at Texas Tech, and I will always be grateful to him for that opportunity.
Did your dad's position as a Tech alum have anything to do with your decision to go to Tech?
It absolutely did. So after being at UTEP, I thought, well, do I want to go to UT Austin? And then I thought about it, and I thought, no. Where would I want to go? Well, my dad had gone to Texas Tech. He studied dairy industry. He made it through the first semester of his senior year, and then he met my mother, and then they got married, and then forget school. But I thought, this would be the perfect way to honor him. And I'm going to get my degree that my dad couldn't get. And so that was why I had my sights set on Texas Tech.
You told us that your dad died when you were 11. What happened?
So, I mentioned that they were very supportive of me in my athletics and my academics. And it was the day that I made the 7th grade girls basketball team, because there weren't any women's or little girls teams that I could join. My dad had talked my way onto the little boys YMCA team, so I was out there balling with the boys from like 4th grade to about 6th. So I was super happy in the 7th grade to actually, be with my own kind. And so that day, my mom picked me up from school and took me home for lunch, and my dad was there. He had just come back from a trip. And I told him, I'm like, hey, while you were gone, I made the basketball team. And he says, yeah, your mom told me. I'm super proud of you. In fact, after you get out of school today, your mom is going to drive you to my work, and I have a surprise for you. So I went back to school. My mom picked me up. I'm excited. Dad has a surprise. We go to his work. Only it was a different kind of surprise. So we pulled into the parking lot, and a gentleman met us there, and he said, y'all better get up there right away. And so I looked at my mom. She didn't know what was going on. We ran up the stairs. We got to my dad's office, and I froze at his doorway. So he was sitting in his office chair, flopping back and forth, throwing up on himself, excreting on himself, having a full-fledged heart attack. So my mom takes off and goes toward him, and I am frozen. I'm 11 years old, and my dad is dying right in front of me. Some woman came and grabbed me and pulled me away and actually locked me in a room with her. And I said, no, we're not doing this. I need to go see my dad. You're not going to go see your dad. I'm going to go see my dad. You're not going to go see your dad. So if you know me at all, I win. So I beat this woman to a pulp. I felt so bad later, but I beat this woman to a pulp. I got out of that room and I got back to where my dad was. And by then, they had him on a gurney and he could not move anything on the left side of his body. His left eye was closed. But he looked at me with his right eye and he winked at me and he waved goodbye. And that was the last time that I saw my dad alive. He died on the way, in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. But I remember after my mom came out of the room holding his watch, I knew that he was gone. And they took us all in there. My sisters were crying hysterically, and my brother was crying, and I wasn't ready yet. I needed to process. But I went in there, and I noticed his hair was messed up, and I had a comb in my back pocket, and I fixed his hair, and I have that memory ingrained. But I missed a lot of school between then and the funeral. And so I talked to my science teacher in particular, and I asked what I'd missed, and she explained to me it was a project that was done live during the class. And I said, hey, would it be okay if I did a report on why my dad died? And the teacher was like, I guess so. So I asked my mom for the diagnosis, and she said it was arterial sclerosis. And that was a big word for an 11-year-old. I didn't know what that was. So I asked if we could go to the library. We went to the library. I read up on it, and I figured out what happened. So I made a clay model of the heart, and I shoved cotton in the area where my dad had his blockage. And I read up on all the foods that cause high cholesterol, and I made a poster board with this is what does it. And then I'm looking at it, and I was like, hey, Mom, you fed Dad fried shrimp and French fries on his last day. That's on this list. And my mom, I'm basically telling my mother that, hey, lady. And so my mom was just like, okay, my little scientist. I said, we're going to need to change our eating habits. And she says, all right, I'm going to put you in charge of groceries. All right, I got this. But I needed to process. I needed to, now, after 30 years of working at NASA, I had to do a lessons learned. There was a traumatic event. I needed to understand what caused that event. And I needed to understand how that is not going to happen again in this family.
That's a phenomenal segue into what role did that experience in your life have on the day that the Columbian happened?
It was good training. So on the day of Columbia, the way it works at NASA, or the way it worked when we flew shuttles, you had a shuttle mission control and you had a space station mission control. STS-107 was a shuttle mission. It did not go to the space station. But the day before, because I knew Rick and I knew Sox, Ken Bauer-Sox, the commander of the space station crew, I was like, hey, it's not every day that we have crews in space at the same time. You guys should hang out. And so we arranged a ship-to-ship comm during dinner. And they got to chat. I think it was the night before, a couple of nights before, and I just thought it was neat. But on the day of Columbia, it was a Monday, and our Mondays are usually really busy in Space Station. And so I had the shuttle loops up as the crew was descending, but then it got very busy, and I punched those loops off. And I started working in mission control. And then I see Sally Davis's face. She was the flight director, former Texas Tech alum. And she's still listening to the flight loop. And I said, what are you listening to? And so I punched the loop back up. And then I turned the TV on. And on the TV, you could see the debris. And I'm listening to Scorch, Charlie Hoba, the shuttle Capcom in the shuttle mission control, call to the crew. And they're not answering. And I knew where they should be. And they should be answering. And so as I am looking at this, the space station crew calls down. Ken Bowersox. Hey, Jen. According to my watch, shuttle should have landed by now. How are things going down there? And I looked at the flight director, and she just shook her head. And so I took a deep breath, and I said, hey, Socks. Yeah, sorry, it's been super busy down here. Give me just a second. I'm going to check in with them, and I'll get right back to you. The thing is, anybody can hear the communications between the space station and mission control. You can be sitting in here, and you can hear it. And what we didn't want to have happen was the whole world to hear what Sox's reaction was going to be. I needed to protect him. And so that's why I channeled Cheery Ginger. So after I did that, then the flight director asked the ground control person, GC, please privatize the comm. So that meant that not even anybody in the room could hear. It was just me and Sox. So once it was privatized, I called back up to Sox. And I said, hey, sorry about that. We're on private comm now. There's not going to be a landing today. And he said, what do you mean? Did they wave off? No, Sox. I wish they had waved off. I am watching CNN right now. I would be happy to pipe up to you what I'm seeing. We have the capability of piping up a television channel. And he says, well, what are you seeing? There's got to be beacons. There's got to be parachutes. There's got to be... I said, Sox, there's not going to be any today. Would you like to see what I'm seeing? And he says, what are you seeing? And I described a little bit about what I was seeing. And he says, Jen, I don't know that I want to see that right now. Would you just be willing to tell me what you're seeing and what you're hearing? I said, absolutely, sir. So anything that I saw on the TV, anything that I heard on the official flight loops, anything else that I heard in discussions not on the loops, I relayed to him. And I did that for what seemed like forever. It may have been 30 minutes, it may have been 40 minutes, I don't know. But I remember watching the clock. We have these clocks in mission control that count down until you hand over to the next satellite. And I remember looking up at the clock and thinking, thank God, we're gonna lose comm in 3 minutes. So I called up to Sox and I said, hey, we are 3 minutes away from a 5-minute gap in communication. I just wanted to alert you in the event my voice cuts off mid-sentence. Be happy to pick this back up with you on the other side. And then he calls down and he's like, thank you so much for doing this. And I'd be happy to take the television feed on the other side if you're ready. And I said, yeah. So we waited until the communication link broke, and normally when you have a loss of signal, everybody gets up and they take a break. And I needed a break. So I took my break and I walked down the hall to the bathroom. And I stood in front of the sink. And I looked at myself in the mirror, and it's like I gave myself permission to be human for a second. And I looked at my watch and I thought, okay, I can cry for about 2 minutes, and then I've got to get back. So I cried for 2 minutes because these were my friends. And but you're not allowed to cry in mission control. And if I'd have done that, it would have been about me. And I had a team to lead in that room. And I certainly needed to be there for Socks. God knows what he was going through. Because that was his ride home. Is he stuck there? Is he going to be able to get... So many things must have been going through his head. And it was my job to protect him. So I allowed myself that moment. And then I went back into mission control and finished my shift.
Do you think that going through that with your dad had given you the ability to hold it together then?
Yes, it gave me the ability in real time. When my dad died, my mom and sisters were crying a lot. And I felt compelled to be the stabilizer. So I learned how to do that. And that came in quite handy at that particular time in mission control. So yes, it also, the aftermath of my dad's death, how I needed to understand what happened and process it so that it couldn't happen again, also served me well, because that became my focus as it did for any NASA employee that was present during that time.
Can you tell us a little bit about the investigations that went on in the aftermath and how those translated into the discussions that you ended up having with third-party companies later on?
Oh, yeah, that's a big, that covers a wide swath. Yeah. So afterwards, I wanted to go help figure out what happened. But my job function at the time was space station. And we had plenty of shuttle crew members who had shuttle experience that were going to be assigned to go off and help with the investigation. So in the early phases, particularly when we were in the process of just trying to find, retrieve our family members and the pieces of the shuttle, I wanted to be out in the field. But I also knew that our astronauts wanted to be out in the field. So I wound up immediately after the event, spending most of my time working double shifts so that our astronauts could go out and find our friends. And once that phase was over and the investigation went forth, I focused on the ISS crew. How do we get them home? What conversations can I have with my Russian counterparts? Let's inventory the food. We're going to run out of food. We're going to run out of supplies. How can we make it last? And I shared an office with Paul Lockhart, Katie Coleman, Mike Miziora, and I would hear daily reports on investigations about the foam, how it was manufactured, how it was applied, how we could learn to do it differently so foam wouldn't fall off. Tile, how can we change the adhesive to make it stay? How can we do tile repair? So I was kept informed and with everything that was going on, and it really was an innovative time at NASA and a focused time at NASA, because none of us wanted to have that feeling ever again that we let our friends down. And so once we were able to fly again, and that was when STS-114 launched, everybody was in knots, more so with the landing. But once we got that under our belt, and the next one, and the next one, we thought, we're okay. We've minimized the risk here, and it's time to start carrying those lessons forward to other companies. And so later in my career, I wound up being responsible for the Office of Operational Safety as we started doing business with these commercial companies, primarily SpaceX and Boeing, who were hired to build the spacecraft that would take our crews back and forth to the space station after the shuttle retired. And with SpaceX, and I can say this now because I'm not a current NASA employee, but with SpaceX, they had some issues with their parachute systems. And they were going to fly with a configuration and a test plan that I was not comfortable with. Part of the lessons from Challenger was about really understanding risk management, really being able to characterize the risk. They could not characterize the risk of that parachute system. And yet, the system was going to let them through. Part of the lessons from Columbia was schedule pressure and making sure that voices were heard all along the way. That was not, I could see it. I read the reports, the CABE report, the Rogers report, and I knew that we were starting to see signs of that happening again. And so I made sure all of my employees, I shared a little bit of this story with them, but primarily we would review those reports. And I said, anytime you see this, if you feel uncomfortable speaking up in a meeting, you come tell me, because I don't feel uncomfortable. And I would get this feedback, and I challenged the SpaceX parachute test plan, parachute design. We got changes to the test plan. We got changes to the design that made me feel comfortable because my employees knew that that was important. And it's important to me, sometimes you learn these lessons in the worst ways. And if we're going to learn a lesson that way, I owe it to that crew not to learn it again that way. And I trained my employees that even if they weren't there with me on that day, they felt it. And I needed them to feel it every time they walked into a meeting, anytime they made a decision, anytime they felt that uncomfortable thing in their gut, that they could come to me and I would take it for them. So I think I am not alone in this. I think there are a number of NASA employees that feel that way and that continue, and in our contractor communities that feel that way, and that will continue to carry that flag and be the person that says, no, you're not going to do that, because we thought foam was okay. We thought O-rings were okay. And so what else is out there that we think is okay that is absolutely not?
When you and I talked for the magazine interview several months ago now, you told me that that was the first time anyone had ever asked you about your experience? With us.
Odd. I don't share this story very often, primarily because this is going to sound strange. It's not significant. There are thousands of people like me that were there somewhere that day that have a story. And while that each of our individual stories has motivated us in very different ways over the last 20 years, we share one thing in common. We don't ever want anybody else to feel that way. But for us to stand up and say we're going to tell our story, the real stories are the astronauts and their families. I grew up in the astronaut office, and they are my family. And that day changes these families in ways that you and I will never comprehend. And those are the stories. Those are the stories that resonate with people, which is why I haven't really told my story. And when I talk to these companies about, hey, SpaceX, you need to redesign your parachutes or your helmets, or make sure that the life support system in the astronaut spacesuit is automatically initiated when there's a depressurization of the cabin. I am thinking of the astronaut stories and the astronaut family stories, because I don't want that to happen again. Not mine. So that's why I don't share it. I share it in the context of our astronaut and their family stories.
Anything else you'd like to say?
It's just that I thank you for allowing me to share this experience, but speaking of astronaut and family stories, I've had an opportunity to meet with Evelyn and her beautiful daughter, Laura, and you're going to get to hear that. And it's so hard for them to come up here and tell their story. And I want you to listen and appreciate that and internalize that and appreciate their courage. And just know that there are many more people like me who will do everything in their power for there not to be another story like this. But this event has given me an opportunity to make a new friend. And Evelyn is awesome. And Laura is awesome. And she is a wonderful and courageous and just intensely godly woman. And I respect her so much, and I'm looking forward to hearing from her. So I would like to invite Evelyn up on the stage now.
I think it will be in a second. Ginger, thank you so much. Evelyn, I really appreciate you coming up and talking with us today too. I
don't think I'm on. Am I on?
I think we should be on momentarily.
Okay.
Ginger alluded to the impact of these kind of events on families, and I do want to get into that. But first, I want to start with today's January 28th, which is a day of its own significance in your family. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Is my microphone on okay? I don't know if it's on. Can you all hear me? Yes? No. People are saying no. I think this one's going to work. Let's see. Yes. Hear me now? Awesome. January 28th is an amazing day, but it's a tough one. And so I was a hard sell for Glennis when she wanted me to come do this. And then when she asked me to do it on the 28th of January, I thought, man, you're really hitting all the marks here. So way back in 1977, Rick and I had our first date in Lubbock. I was barely 18, he was 19. And we went on a date. We had gone to the Coliseum, which I think is gone, isn't it? It's been demolished. But anyway, we went to a Texas Tech basketball game, and he sat a row in front of me with his friends, and I was there with mine. And I noticed him. We were both from the same hometown. We're both from Amarillo, and I thought he was really cute. He was a year ahead of me in school. So as I left or came back up to my seat, I looked at him and smiled and said hello. And so we made eye contact, and he remembered me. Wasn't sure if he remembered my name. Thankfully, he figured it out. And he called the tech operator, so this makes me sound like I'm 3,000 years old. But anyway, who asked if they had a number for Evelyn Neely, which was my name. Thankfully, they did. And so he called and asked me to go on a date. And so he called it was the 24th of January to go out on the 28th. So we went on our first date. We went to dinner. I don't think Smuggler's Inn is in Lubbock anymore either, but that's where we went back in the dark ages, and went to dinner. And so my mom had always told me that especially when you go on a date, that you need to ask the guy about himself because they enjoy that. So that's what I did. So tell me, about yourself. And so he told me that he'd wanted to be an astronaut since he was 4. And he had a little deviation there. For a while, he wanted to be a Dallas Cowboy, but he realized that wasn't realistic. So I guess being an astronaut was much easier. But it was just a neat conversation. I was really impressed with him, liked him from the start. He did knock his water over during our dinner and just almost soaked me, but I managed to jink out of the way just before the water came flowing across the table, and there was a light fixture hanging down over the table, and he bumped his head on it when he was trying to clean everything up. And so I thought, well, hopefully he'll have a few years before he gets into the astronaut program, kind of sort all that out. So anyway, but I liked him from the beginning, just really liked him. It turns out we grew up a mile apart in Amarillo, and like I said, we'd gone to high school together. So we dated all through college, all through Texas Tech. One of our dear friends, Robert, I'm looking right at you, Robert, wave. Robert was friends with Rick in engineering, and we just, to be perfectly honest, we would date and break up and date and break up and date around, and then it was, but anyway, we made it through. So by the time we graduated in 1980, we were pretty sure that we wanted to get married, but we realized probably it was not the best choice to start our marriage with him entering the Air Force and starting pilot training. So I moved to Dallas and worked for WBAP radio for a couple of years, and he went to
the huge home place of Enid, Oklahoma, to go through pilot training. And aren't you from Enid, Oklahoma? Yes, thank you. So there was a brochure about Enid, Oklahoma, and it said it was the word dine spelled backwards, which I thought was kind of sad but he loved it. He loved Vance Air Force Base. It was wonderful. And when we were married in 1982. After that, the Challenger accident happened on this day. So we'd only been married about 4 years, and that was absolutely awful. So I sat riveted in front of the TV the entire day, watching that and just in shock and horror. I knew that Rick wanted to be an astronaut. Who knew that if he would ever achieve that? But it was just gut-wrenching to see these families and what they were going to go through. I remember looking at June Scobie Rogers and thinking, man, I could never go through that. Like, she just, just all of the families. And so that was just heart-wrenching. Fast forward, he actually did become an astronaut. We moved here to Houston in 1995. I was pregnant with our son. My daughter Laura was 4. We moved here, and he went into space in May of '99. And his second mission was on Columbia on STS-107. And we still didn't have the technology that we have now, so I had to go up here to Johnson Space Center to talk to him. We emailed every day, but to have video conferences, I actually had to go there. And Rick and I would have this little joke. It's just like, nothing we say is private. So, nothing we email is private. So, I mean, we just, I was very careful with that. But we had this horrible time slot that they gave us based on where the space shuttle would be, and it was 6 a.m. Now, anybody who knows my family and knows me, that is not really an option, but apparently NASA didn't care, so they assigned 6 a.m. So that was awful, because if you have to be somewhere at 6 a.m., that means you have to get up before 6 a.m. So that was very challenging, but we did it. And so when we appeared for the video, Laura Matthew hid, and the very first thing Rick said to me was, "Happy dating anniversary." So this was on January 28th, 2003. And I said, I feel really bad, but Laura Matthew, we couldn't get our act together, so it's just me. And he goes, "I totally understand." And then they jumped out and said hello. And so he was extremely impressed because he knew that this was a very big deal. And Matthew only got mad once during that video conference and hid from him, so that was nice. Rick got to parent from space, so that was very cool. But anyway, so Rick, wished me a happy dating anniversary. We had a lovely video conference. The tail end of it, the screen froze, so I could see Rick's face, he could see ours, but we weren't live anymore, but we could hear each other, so the audio was still working. And Rick said, I can't see you either, but let's just keep talking. So we just started telling each other how much we loved each other, and we said it over and over. And those were my last words with him. And later that day, he paid a huge tribute to the Challenger crew and their families, and just did such a neat job. And they had a new teacher in space program, and they talked about that. And June Scobie Rogers was all involved with that. And again, I saw her on TV, and I just thought, man, I just have so much admiration for this woman, but there's no way I could even imagine what she's had to walk through. And 4 days later, there I am. So I actually texted with her today, and she is a dear friend. But yeah, this is a significant day.
In the aftermath of what you went through with Columbia, I know that you wrote a book talking about Rick's faith and your faith and how much that helped you through the process. What was that like for you, trying to share that with the whole world and let them in on that moment?
Well, I was delighted because it's very important to me. And so the cool thing was the news media had to treat me really nicely, so I was able to say things about my faith that I couldn't normally share. But I did do an interview, I guess, this week, and they did manage to edit out all of that, so they're very clever. But Rick and I, as I told you, met when we were really young, and we grew together as a couple, and we grew together in our relationship with Jesus. And that was extremely important to us, and it flourished and grew. And it was the number one thing for us. It took Rick a long time to figure it out. He went through a lot in his training and trying to organize his life and have balance, which I'm sure everybody in this room can relate to, of your priorities. But he figured out that he needed to put God first. He needed to put his family second and put his job third. And even though he had a very cool job, it still needed to be in that order. And he did a really great job of that. And so when each astronaut flies, they fill out contingency papers, and it's all of the things that they want to make sure happens in case there's an accident. And all Rick put on the instructions, there's special instructions, was tell them about Jesus. He's real to me. When he signed every astronaut picture, he always put a Bible verse on it, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So he put that on every picture. It was just a priority for him, and it really influenced us, and it influenced my children. The number one thing for Rick is that he wanted them to have a relationship with Jesus. And so Laura was 12 when Rick passed, and Matthew was 7, but they very much had that exposure to that, and so much so that when Rick flew in space, he made videotapes for both of them. They had little devotional books they did every day with Rick, and he recorded all of the days that he was going to be out of town on his space mission for them to watch each day, and he would read a little Bible verse and the little story that went with it and say a prayer and then just talk to them. And so clearly he had other things to do than to make these videos for Laura and Matthew, but again, that was a priority. And to this day, we're extremely grateful for that.
When you and I spoke a few weeks ago, you told me an analogy about grief being like a coat that you put on, and that has just stuck with me. Would you share that with us?
Is that me or you? I don't know. I actually heard this from a friend who had lost her child, which I can't fathom. But she compared grief to, and it resonated with me, she compared grief to being like a coat. So when it first happens, it's a very heavy coat. It's a pretty heavy burden. As the years roll by, sometimes you still wear that heavy coat, but more often you'll wear a lighter jacket, a lighter coat. So it's always there, but the magnitude of it changes somewhat, mercifully. I mean, I can't imagine being stuck in the place I was on February 1st, 2003 and never being able to move forward. I can't think of anything worse. And even having said that, advance it 2 more months because we were in incredible shock. We were shocked. And that's the mercy of God to not take the full brunt of what you're facing. So as that rolled out, that coat became quite heavy. But the Lord has been very gracious in our lives and very faithful. And through the years, it has lightened. It will never go away, but it has lightened.
I can only imagine that in the months after that, that was excruciating for your family. What is it like now?
I have an amazing life that I am so grateful for. I remarried a wonderful man, Bill Thompson, 15 years ago. He loves me so well. He was widowed as well. And because of that, through his children, we have 4 beautiful granddaughters, which is beyond cool, and we come here all the time. We've laid on the floor where you all are sitting to watch the light display, and we have a blast. So I'm extremely grateful. I would not have chosen this path in any way, shape, or form, but I stand in awe of how God has taken care of us.
I know that in the aftermath of what your family went through, you have gotten involved with several other organizations that serve families like yours. Can you tell us about Fathers in the Field?
Sure. So about 10 years ago, a friend contacted me. She was doing some freelance PR work, and she said, this is really an amazing ministry. Have you ever heard of Fathers in the Field? And I said, no. And she said, it's a ministry for fatherless boys, and they reach out to them, and it's an age range between 7 and 17. It's for boys who don't have fathers, and it's raising up in the local church, mentor fathers to minister to these boys. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. And before long, John Smith Baker, who had founded it, contacted me and asked me if I would serve on their board. And so I thought about it for a little bit and agreed to do that. I've been doing that for almost 10 years. So I've watched this ministry. It's in 35 states. I think it's even more than that now. Been around about 17 years. But I've flown at the 30,000-foot level of the ministry. I know the integrity of it. I know what we do. I know that we don't spend a penny on things that are not related to the ministry. I've been super impressed with it, but have never been able to actually see a launch in the church. And so we tried for some time in our church here in Houston to get it started, and we're not successful until about a year and a half ago. And so we met with our pastor, and he said, let's do it. And it took so long. I felt like I was pregnant almost 2 years trying to get this started. But the fatherless boy is the last to hear about it. We recruit men. We had a huge thing to recruit them for several months, a campaign, had a big lunch for them. I think we had maybe 50 men that came. And we are narrowed down to 7, which is exactly we need one more. But we are about to have what we call a signing ceremony February 5th. And it is going to pair these incredible men that we have vetted till the cows come home to make sure that they are good and decent men. They have gone through rigorous training and many requirements and are extremely excited. Several of them work for NASA. I'm so proud of them, so proud of them. But they have been paired with these boys. They've now met, the boys have met their mentor fathers. All of them come in with their arms crossed and they just think, I don't want to do this. And they leave just thrilled out of their mind. They can't wait. One of them had a little glint in his eye and he goes, wow, this means I get to get out of the house. And I said, yes, it does. But they're so excited. So I'm extremely passionate about that. I watched what Laura and Matthew have gone through. Fatherlessness is awful. And so I'm extremely excited about this, and it just really is a thrilling thing to see that we can actually rescue somebody and maybe change the trajectory of their life. So that's super cool, and it's a 3-year commitment. That's why the men kind of faded. So I'm very proud of the ones that have persevered.
I know that you've still stayed remarkably connected to NASA through all of the last 20 years. So much so that you now even have a NASA intern who is living with you part-time. Is that correct?
He's not right this second, but he wants to climb under the table right now. But Zach, just raise one arm. You can raise one arm. There you go. All right, so Zach, the intern. So Zach is a junior, right? At Western Kentucky. Is it Western Kentucky? Is that right? In Bowling Green. His dad's a pastor, called our church and just was wanting to figure out where to house his son. He had an internship at NASA in the fall. And so I asked a couple of friends, and I thought, man, we've just got so much going on. I don't know if we can do this. And then they couldn't do it. And I looked at Bill and I said, I think we're supposed to do this. So we got to meet Zach in June, and he lived with us this fall. And he came back just for this. So give Zach a hand. So I told Zach that we want to adopt him, but we will not pay for college. But he's amazing. He'll be back with us in May and be in his second round of internship this summer, and then back in the spring of 2024. But it's just another example of how life can be really tough, but it can also be really cool. And Zach came home every day with just incredible stories. They put him to really good use. He got to do some extremely interesting things, and we'll be continuing to do that. And I'm just really excited to watch his career blossom. He'll remember him because he's going to be in charge someday. He's a smart young man. He also is going to be 21 on February 1st. So Zach was 1 year old the day of Columbia. So I think it's very providential that our lives have crossed. I'm very grateful. All right, Zach, we're all done. You don't, because.
When you look back now, obviously things did not go the way you would have chosen for them to, or the way you ever would have imagined for them to. But do you see it as a blessing, the way that things have turned out?
I have.
I mean, God promises to not just watch us go through the storms of life. He promises to go through them with us. And He has been forever faithful. It's tough in the beginning, and especially when you're going through all the trauma, and it still is. And yet, it's amazing to see the incredible people that the Lord puts in your life. And you're one of them, Glennis. And one of the things I admire about her, and I will say this even though I ignored her for a really long time, and I feel really bad about that, so I'm publicly confessing that to you. I'm really sorry. But the thing I admire about Glennis, and I greatly appreciate, is her due diligence to tell the story carefully and accurately. So that is why I'm sitting here, because I have huge admiration for her. And I just appreciate Texas Tech so much doing this. It just is extremely honoring, so thank you.
So much. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
I'm good.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. This was wonderful. Thank you. With no further ado, I'm going to turn it back over to our president, Skuvanek. Thank you all so much for being here and sharing this night with us. It has been my deepest honor to get to speak with these wonderful ladies and bring it to you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Glennis. Evelyn and Ginger, thank you so very much. I think we all came here with a deep sense of admiration for you. And I think now we have a much deeper sense of your beauty and your strength. I don't think I can add, we're just so grateful that you shared this evening with us. May God bless you. Thank all of you for being here. I'm very proud that we shared this evening together as Red Raiders. Go Tech.